When I was standing over the smoking grates in the backyard of the estate I built with my late wife nearly 4 decades ago, carefully turning prime-cut ribs to feed my extended family, my daughter-in-law suddenly shrieked at the top of her lungs. My $4,000 diamond bracelet is missing. Before I could even turn around to process the scream, she closed the distance, shoved her manicured hand straight into my canvas chore jacket pocket, and yanked out the glittering piece of jewelry she had secretly planted there only seconds prior. "You filthy thief," she yelled in front of every relative, neighbor, and lifelong friend gathered on my lawn. I looked across the brick patio toward my only son, waiting for him to step in, defend the man who raised him, and put an end to the madness. Instead, he stepped up beside his wife, fixed me with a gaze colder than winter concrete, and said, "Get out of here, Dad, before you disgrace this family any further." In that singular, freezing heartbeat, 40 years of unconditional paternal mercy slammed shut forever. Welcome to Dad's ultimate payback. Drop a comment right now and let us know where you are watching from, your city, your state, or your country. The Dad's Ultimate Payback community stands for justice, dignity, and the unyielding truth that love without firm boundaries is nothing more than self-inflicted ruin. Tell me where you are standing with us today. While certain creative elements have been dramatized for narrative impact, the raw lessons on protecting your self-respect and holding toxic kin accountable are entirely real. My name is Lawrence Whitfield. I am 65 years old, a retired structural builder and general contractor who spent 40 hard years pouring concrete, framing commercial load-bearing walls, and raising residential structures across metro Atlanta. When you work with structural steel and cured Georgia pine, you learn that numbers never lie, plumb lines never bend for feelings, and a foundation built on rot will inevitably collapse under its own weight. 38 years ago, my late wife Yvonne and I bought 6 acres of untouched rolling land along a quiet ridge in Roswell, Fulton County. Together we designed and built our brick colonial estate beam by beam, laying the reclaimed brick patio, planting the sprawling garden, and placing the tall French windows to catch the dawnlight. When Yvonne passed away 3 years ago after a brutal battle with cancer, the soul of that house felt hollow. In my grief, I made the fatal mistake of confusing sacrifice with fatherhood. I allowed our 35-year-old son, Soren, and his 33-year-old wife, Tatiana, to move into the main house rent-free while I quietly retreated into the modest bedroom suite at the far end of the upper hall. Soren called himself a financial venture consultant, though his shell companies bled money every quarter, and he rarely rolled out of bed before noon. Tatiana branded herself a high-end interior designer in North Atlanta, despite not having billed a paying client in over 2 years. For 3 years, I subsidized their lifestyle, quietly covering the $600 monthly utility bills Soren ignored on the kitchen counter, wiring funds for the luxury SUV insurance Tatiana repeatedly forgot, and keeping the estate pristine with my own 2 hands. That Saturday was supposed to be our traditional family barbecue. I had risen at 5 in the morning, marinating the meats, setting up the heavy folding tables, and hanging warm amber string lights between the brick pillars and the grand oak tree Yvonne had planted the year Soren was born. By 6 in the evening, the patio was filled with nearly 30 guests. My younger sister Renee, 58, had flown up from Jacksonville. Her 24-year-old son Callum, a quiet graduate student, sat near the fence line. Alongside them were lifelong Roswell neighbors, cousins, and business acquaintances. I was standing beside the large stainless steel grill, smoke drifting upward into the Georgia dusk. When Tatiana initiated her ambush, she let out a piercing gasp, dropping a crystal wine glass so that it shattered across the flagstones, ruby liquid splashing over my work boots. "My sapphire and diamond tennis bracelet, it's gone!" Tatiana cried, clutching her bare wrist. "Someone in this yard stole it right off the outdoor console." The backyard chatter instantly died. The clinking of silverware stopped. Before anyone could offer to help search, Tatiana marched directly toward me with calculated fury. Her right hand darted forward, slipping into the open side pocket of my canvas jacket, and with a theatrical flourish, she yanked the $4,000 bracelet into the air, holding it high under the glow of the amber lights. "You filthy thief!" she screamed, her voice echoing off the brick facade of the mansion. "You're the only one who pokes through personal belongings in this house. How dare you steal from your own family?" I pressed a palm against my chest where her hand had just invaded, stunned by the sheer velocity of the frame-up. Minutes earlier, as I had leaned over the buffet table to arrange the serving platters, I had felt a fleeting feather light brush against my jacket, but I had dismissed it as a passing guest brushing past. Now the trap snapped shut. "Tatiana, I didn't touch your bracelet," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through my veins. "You know damn well I didn't take anything from you." "Don't lie to everyone, Lawrence," she shrieked, tears springing to her eyes in a performance worthy of an Academy Award. "It was inside your pocket. 30 people just saw me pull it out. You've been wandering around this property acting confused, taking things, and now you're stealing fine jewelry. I looked past her, fixing my eyes on Soren. My son walked forward, holding a highball glass, dressed in an expensive linen shirt I had bought him for his birthday. He didn't look at the grill, he didn't look at the food I had cooked, and he certainly didn't look at me with an ounce of filial affection. He stepped directly to his wife's side, squaring his shoulders. "Don't deny it, Dad," Soren said, his tone dripping with cold, rehearsed disdain. "You've humiliated this whole family in front of our guests. You can't keep acting like you own this place and taking whatever you want. Get out of here before you disgrace us any further." My sister Renee took a frantic step forward from the table. "Wait, Soren, this doesn't make any sense. Your father would never." Soren swung his head around, cutting her off with a vicious, venomous glare that made her freeze mid-sentence. Renee looked at me, then at the floor, cowed by the hostility radiating from my son. Beside the fence, Callum stood rigid, his fists clenched white at his side, staring at his cousin with pure disgust. Yet trapped in the paralyzing silence of youth, the neighbors averted their eyes, staring down at their paper plates. "I built this house 38 years ago," I said quietly, looking Soren dead in the eye. "I carried the chairs from the garage this morning. I bought every ounce of food on these tables. I am not apologizing for a theft I didn't commit, and I am not leaving my own home." Soren offered a thin, wicked smirk, the smile of a man who believed he held all the cards. "Then walk away, Dad, because nobody here wants you around." I didn't yell. I didn't throw a punch. I set the stainless steel grilling tongs onto the side burner, unclipped my apron, and folded it neatly across the patio table. As I walked down the brick path toward the driveway, passing under the amber lights and the towering branches of Yvonne's oak tree, I heard Soren's voice behind me, smoothly addressing the crowd. "Apologies for the disruption, everyone. Let's get back to the food. Dad's just having one of his difficult episodes." Not a single soul followed me. Not one person stepped out to ask if I was all right. I reached my truck in the driveway, my hands trembling with an icy, dangerous fury. I sat behind the wheel in the darkness, watching the silhouettes of 30 people laughing through the dining room windows, continuing the party as if my 40 years of labor were nothing more than a minor inconvenience. Then my phone buzzed in the cup holder with an incoming notification. It wasn't an apology from family. It was an urgent alert from our neighborhood Ring app and the Roswell Community Parent-Teacher Forum. I unlocked the screen, and the air left my lungs in a sharp gasp. Tatiana hadn't just orchestrated a private backyard humiliation. She had weaponized the entire digital community against me. Standing near the patio bar, Tatiana's close friend Courtney had secretly recorded the entire confrontation on high-definition video from the moment Tatiana reached into my pocket. Less than 4 minutes after I walked away, Tatiana had uploaded the footage to the Fulton County Social Board, the Neighborhood Watch page, and the local private school network where my family had maintained an honorable reputation for 30 years. Above the video, the caption read, "Heartbroken to share the reality of what we've been dealing with at home. My father-in-law, Lawrence Whitfield, caught red-handed stealing fine heirlooms from our family. Please keep our home in your prayers as we navigate severe elder behavioral decline and theft." Dozens of comments were already flooding in from local business owners and church members. Unbelievable. So sad to see someone fall so far. Stay safe, Tatiana. She was systematically executing a character assassination designed to destroy my social standing, isolate me from my community, and manufacture a public record of cognitive and moral decay. Right as I scrolled past the video, a private call banner flashed across my phone screen. "Incoming call. Henderson Law Offices. Trudy Henderson. Urgent." I stared at the glowing letters in the dark cab of my truck. Trudy Henderson was Yvonne's personal estate attorney from downtown Atlanta, a woman I hadn't spoken to in 3 years. I didn't answer the call immediately. I put the truck in reverse, backed slowly down the long driveway, and drove around the quiet back roads of Roswell for 45 minutes, until my pulse steadied to a cold, razor-sharp rhythm. When I finally pulled back up the drive, slipped quietly through the front door, and climbed the stairs to my small bedroom. The laughter downstairs was still echoing through the floorboards. I locked my bedroom door, sat on the edge of the mattress, and pulled open the bottom drawer of my oak nightstand. Waiting in the dark, untouched for 3 long years, was the polished wooden box Yvonne had given me on our 25th anniversary. Tatiana and Soren believed they had cornered an old man with a planted bracelet and a viral smear campaign. They had no idea that beneath the surface of this house lay a set of structural blueprints drawn up by a dying mother, and the legal hammer was about to drop on both of them. The midnight silence of my small upstairs bedroom was suffocating, punctuated only by the occasional vibration of my phone as another notification rolled in from the viral smear campaign Tatiana had unleashed across Roswell. Downstairs, the front door finally clicked shut as the last lingering guests departed. leaving the 6-acre estate wrapped in a sinister, predatory quiet. I sat on the edge of the mattress under the single pool of yellow light cast by the bedside lamp. Resting across my knees was the cherrywood box with brass hinges, the gift Yvonne had placed in my hands 25 years ago on our silver anniversary. For 3 years since her funeral, I had kept it tucked away in the back of my nightstand drawer, treating it as nothing more than a sacred keepsake of a happier life. With calloused, steadying fingers, I lifted the brass latch and opened the lid. Inside lay a thick sheaf of legal folios bound tightly with an indigo silk ribbon. Resting right on top was the original, certified warranty deed to the Roswell estate, stamped and recorded by the Fulton County Superior Court clerk after probate had concluded. I unfolded the heavy bond paper, scanning the title lines. Sole and executus ochre, Lawrence Alan Whitfield, no joint tenancy. No survivorship rights for heirs, no cosigner. The land, the 6,000 square foot brick structure, and every timber framing it belonged to me and me alone. Beneath the deed sat a secondary document, its legal binding crisp and immaculate. The header across the front page read, Revocable Occupancy License Agreement. I recognized my own signature on the final execution page, dated just 7 days after Yvonne's burial at Greenlawn Cemetery. Back then, I had been an emotional wreck, blinded by grief and barely able to put one foot in front of the other. When estate attorney Trudy Henderson had come to the house with a stack of closing documents, I had signed wherever she pointed, assuming I was simply putting a safety net under our 35-year-old son to ensure he and Tatiana always had a roof over their heads. I turned the pages under the lamp, reading the formal legal covenants with the meticulous scrutiny of a builder inspecting a foundation. It was not a lease. It granted no tenant protections under Georgia residential tenancy statutes. It was a conditional, permissive license, a privilege granted entirely at the discretion of the licensor, revocable without notice upon breach of conduct. My breath caught as my eyes locked onto Clause 6, highlighted in clean yellow marker. This occupancy license shall terminate immediately and automatically, without necessity of prior judicial notice or cure period, upon any verified act of harassment, defamation, physical intimidation, or elder financial exploitation directed toward the licensor by the licensee or their co-occupants. I reread those words 3 times in the dim light. Elder financial exploitation, defamation, harassment. Yvonne had not drafted this agreement to protect Soren from the cold world. She had drafted it to build a steel-reinforced barrier around me for the day Soren's greed finally turned lethal. At the very bottom of the cherrywood box lay a heavy, cream-colored envelope sealed with deep navy wax. In Yvonne's elegant, unmistakable cursive across the front were the words, "To be delivered to Trudy Henderson-esque, only when the worst has finally come to pass." I checked the brass mantel clock. It was 10:45 p.m. I reached for my phone, found the urgent missed call notification, and dialed the direct private line for Trudy Henderson's downtown Atlanta office. She answered on the very first ring. "Lawrence," Trudy's voice came across the line, not with surprise, but with the solemn, razor-sharp acknowledgement of a seasoned litigator who had been keeping watch in the dark. "I've been waiting for this call." Trudy was 55 years old and had practiced high-stakes estate and asset protection law out of her Peachtree Street high-rise for 27 years. She was a woman who didn't deal in sentimental platitudes. She dealt in cold, unbreakable statutes. "You knew about the license agreement, Trudy?" I asked, my voice raspy against the quiet room. "You knew what was inside this box?" "Lawrence, Yvonne came to my private office 3 separate times during the final 6 months of her chemotherapy," Trudy answered softly. "She paid my retainer out of her personal savings account and left an exhaustive ironclad asset defense dossier with strict testamentary instructions." I closed my eyes, leaning my forehead against my palm. "Why didn't you tell me 3 years ago when we signed the papers?" "Because Yvonne specifically made me swear an oath to hold it in escrow until you initiated contact," Trudy explained, her tone measured and compassionate. She told me, "Trudy, my husband is a builder. He believes everything can be repaired with enough patience, honest sweat, and forgiveness. If you show him this file before he sees our son's true nature with his own eyes, he will rationalize the rot and tear down the defenses I've built to save him. Wait until he calls you. When he calls, the illusion will be broken, and he will be ready to survive." A heavy silence hung between us over the cellular line. "She knew me better than I knew myself," I whispered. "She loved you, Lawrence," Trudy replied, "and she knew Soren. But there is a sealed memorandum inside that master file that goes far beyond occupancy agreements and property deeds. It is something Yvonne uncovered in her final weeks in hospice care at Emory St. Joseph's Hospital, something she forbade me from disclosing until you were facing an active crisis." My grip tightened on the receiver until my knuckles turned white. "Tell me, Trudy. I'm looking at a viral video where my daughter-in-law framed me for grand larceny in front of 30 people, while my son told me to get out of my own house. I am ready for whatever is in that file. Trudy took a long, steady breath before speaking. 2 weeks before Yvonne passed away, when she was in the palliative care unit in Sandy Springs, she suffered a severe respiratory distress episode. The nurse stepped out of the room for less than 10 minutes to retrieve specialized arterial medication from the dispensary. During that exact window, Soren entered the room. Trudy's voice dropped into a terrifying icy gravity. Yvonne had a PCA morphine and oxygen infusion pump connected to her central line. The internal electronic telemetry log later showed that someone manually adjusted the digital regulator valve, throttling her supplemental oxygen flow down by 75% for nearly 15 minutes. When the respiratory therapist rushed back into the room after the low-flow alarm tripped at the central nursing station, Soren was leaning over his mother's bed with a notary pen in one hand and a durable financial power of attorney form in the other, whispering that he would restore her oxygen line the second she signed over her secondary investment portfolio and the estate deed. The room seemed to drop below freezing. A sick, violent nausea rose in my throat. "Yvonne, what did she do?" I choked out, tears of horror burning behind my eyelids. "Your wife was a fighter, Lawrence," Trudy said, her voice shaking with quiet fury. Even in hypoxic shock, with her heart rate plummeting, she took the pen and jammed the steel tip into the back of Soren's wrist until he backed away in pain, right as the medical team burst through the door. Sorensen claimed he had accidentally bumped the oxygen regulator while adjusting her blanket. And because Yvonne didn't want to break your heart while she was dying, she refused to press hospital charges that night. Trudy paused, the rustle of legal bond paper audible over the line. Instead, the following morning, Yvonne had the head of nursing summon me to her bedside with a court stenographer. She recorded a formal deposition under penalty of perjury, attached the digital pump diagnostic logs, and appended a private handwritten letter to Soren. The ink on that letter is smudged with her dried tears, Lawrence. It is the testimony of a dying mother who realized her son had become a monster willing to trade her last breath for a signature. I sat frozen on the bed, staring at the wax-sealed envelope resting on my lap. The memory of Yvonne's frail, translucent hands during those final hospital visits flashed through my mind. She had carried the unbearable agony of that betrayal alone in the dark, shielding me from the horrific truth so that our final days together wouldn't be poisoned by our son's depravity. "He didn't just want the house tonight, Lawrence," Trudy continued with lethal clarity. "The planted bracelet, the viral smear video, the public humiliation. They are running a textbook playbook to establish a documented record of cognitive decline so they can petition for emergency conservatorship and strip you of your legal autonomy." I looked out the second-story window at the moonlit branches of Yvonne's oak tree, standing tall and immovable against the Georgia night sky. The pain, the grief, and the paralyzing disbelief dissolved completely. In their place arose the cold, calculating discipline of a master builder who had just discovered termites in the structural beams of his home. "Trudy," I said, my voice dropping into an absolute level calm that carried the weight of 40 years of hard labor. "Open the master file. Execute every clause Yvonne drafted. Tomorrow morning at 8, we begin the demolition." On Monday morning at precisely 8:30 a.m., I sat in the 14th floor corner office of Henderson Law Offices overlooking the bustling corridor of Peachtree Street in downtown Atlanta. Outside the towering plate glass windows, morning sunlight glanced off the city's granite and glass skyline, but inside Trudy Henderson's wood-paneled suite, the atmosphere was as cold and austere as a courtroom vault. Trudy sat across from me behind a massive mahogany desk, her reading glasses pushed down the bridge of her nose. Without a word of conversational preamble, she unclasped a thick, red rope legal file and spread 3 bound sets of financial instruments across the polished surface. "Look closely at these, Lawrence," Trudy said, her voice dropping into a razor-sharp clinical register. "This is why your son and daughter-in-law are moving with such frantic desperation." I picked up the top folio, a commercial promissory note and secondary mortgage deed dated April 2023, issued through a private secondary lending institution in Buckhead. As I turned to the final signature page, a cold shock shot through my chest. Stamped right over the notarized line was my name, Lawrence Allen Whitfield. Beside it was a signature so painstakingly reproduced that even my practiced draftsman's eye had to look twice. The distinct slant of the capital L, the deliberate hesitation on the crossbar of the A, and the heavy downstroke on the W were uncanny, but it was a complete forgery. $180,000, Trudy stated flatly, tapping the principal line with her gold fountain pen. Soren secured a high-interest commercial cash-out loan against the Roswell estate to inject emergency liquidity into his failing venture consultancy. He bypassed a standard title search by utilizing an unscrupulous closing broker who overlooked basic identity verification protocols. Under Georgia Code 1691, this is first-degree forgery. Combined with the fraudulent lien placed upon your homestead, It constitutes high-level mortgage fraud and grand larceny against a protected senior citizen. If prosecuted under Georgia Statute 35-8, the combined sentencing guidelines carry up to 20 years in state prison. I laid the document down with a steady, deliberate hand. My mind drifted back to the barbecue, to Tatiana holding up the planted diamond bracelet, to the viral video smearing my name across Fulton County, to Soren telling me to leave my own house. The bracelet wasn't a spontaneous outburst, I said quietly. It was a prerequisite. Precisely, Trudy replied, leaning forward with her elbows on the desk. The lender issued a 90-day notice of default on that $180,000 balance 2 months ago. Soren is facing complete financial collapse and impending criminal exposure the second the lien is contested. Their only escape route is to obtain complete legal control over your estate before the bank forecloses or before you discover the fraud. They need to strip you of your legal capacity so they can sign refinancing instruments in your name. Then it is time to cut off the oxygen to their machine, I said, standing up from the leather chair. I left the high-rise office carrying a single manila folder containing certified copies of the fraudulent mortgage. By the time I reached my truck in the underground parking garage, my counter-strategy was already mapped out with the structural precision of an engineer executing a controlled demolition. At 10:15 a.m., I called my private banking representative from the cab of my truck. My name is Lawrence Whitfield. I am requesting an immediate, permanent cancellation of the secondary authorized credit card, ending in 4782, issued under my son Soren's name. Furthermore, place a zero-limit fraud freeze on all subsidiary checking lines. The banker processed the cancellation within 90 seconds. At 11 a.m., I pulled into a quiet parking lot off GA 400 and dialed the commercial auto insurance carrier. I am the sole policyholder on account 9021. Remove Tatiana Whitfield and her leased European SUV from my umbrella coverage effective 12 o'clock noon today. At 11:30 a.m., I accessed my municipal utility and telecommunications accounts online, systematically terminating the automated payment debits for the high-speed fiber internet, the commercial security package, and the $500 monthly electrical grid that kept their lavish living quarters running. I announced nothing. I sent no angry text messages. I made no threats. I simply dismantled the financial scaffolding that had enabled their parasitic existence for 3 long years. If you stand with a father who refused to let his sacrifice be treated like a doormat and finally laid down the law of justice, comment the word justice down below right now. On Wednesday afternoon, the immediate shockwaves of my financial freeze hit the Roswell estate. I was sitting in my ground floor study, reading through the historical property survey maps of our 6-acre parcel, when the heavy oak door of the study was kicked open without a knock. Soren strode into the room, his face flushed a furious mottled crimson. He was dressed in an expensive bespoke blazer, but his hair was disheveled and his eyes burned with a frantic, unhinged hostility. He marched up to my desk and slammed a multi-page legal document onto the blotter, inches from my hands. The title across the top page was printed in stark, bold lettering, Quitclaim Deed of Absolute Conveyance. You think you're clever, Dad? Soren snarled, his voice trembling with unchecked rage. My corporate card was declined at a client lunch in Midtown. Tatiana's vehicle insurance was terminated in the middle of her commute. The Wi-Fi and power notifications are blowing up our phones. What the hell do you think you're doing? I calmly looked up from my survey map, meeting his furious gaze without blinking. I am simplifying my personal overhead, Soren. I have no obligation to subsidize adults who treat my home like a playground and call me a thief on the internet. Soren let out a harsh, mocking laugh, pacing back and forth across the hardwood floor before planting both hands flat on my desk, leaning down until his face was inches from mine. Let me explain the reality of your situation to you, old man, Soren hissed, his voice dropping into a venomous, bone-chilling whisper. Tatiana and I have already filed an emergency petition for adult guardianship with the Fulton County Probate Court. We have 30 written affidavits from our barbecue guests, your neighbors, and local community members confirming your erratic behavior, your memory lapses, and the fact that you stole Tatiana's diamond bracelet. In 2 weeks, a probate judge is going to declare you mentally incompetent and appoint me as your sole legal conservator. He tapped the quitclaim deed with a stiff finger. You sign this property transfer right now. You transferred the deed into my corporate entity cleanly, and we might allow you to stay in the guest room under supervision. But if you fight this, accidents happen, Dad. People your age slip on wet tile in the shower all the time. One bad fall, one broken hip, and the state will expedite emergency protective custody overnight. The house transfers to me anyway, and you will spend the rest of your miserable, decaying days locked in a state-run memory care ward where nobody will ever visit you. Sign the damn deed. The threat hung in the study like a toxic fog. It was not just a son demanding money. It was a cold-blooded extortionist revealing that he viewed his own father's life as an expendable obstacle. I didn't flinch. I picked up the quitclaim deed, looked at the blank signature line, and slowly slid the paper back across the desk into his chest. "Get out of my study, Soren," I said, my voice as level and immovable as 40 tons of reinforced concrete. "And get out of my sight." Soren's eyes narrowed into slits of pure venom. He snatched the paper off the desk. "You just signed your own death warrant, Dad. Don't say I didn't give you an easy way out." He turned on his heel and slammed the heavy oak door behind him so hard the framed architectural blueprints on the wall rattled against their studs. Less than 24 hours later, on Thursday afternoon at 4:30 p.m., the front doorbell chimed. I opened the grand front door to find a sharp-featured man in a dark gray suit holding a clipboard and a sealed official courier envelope. "Lawrence Allen Whitfield?" the man asked formally. "I am Lawrence Whitfield. My name is Marcus Brennan, certified process server for Fulton County Superior and Probate Courts. You are formally served with legal process." He handed me the heavy envelope, made a notation on his digital tablet, tipped his hat, and walked back down the brick path toward his unmarked sedan. I took the envelope into my study, sat behind my desk, and sliced open the red court seal. Inside was a 28-page summons. In Rye. Emergency petition for adult guardianship and conservatorship of Lawrence Whit, alleged incapacitated adult. The petition was signed by Tatiana Whitfield and co-petitioned by Soren Whitfield. It cited alleged severe cognitive decline, dangerous lapses in memory, paranoid delusions regarding family finances, and acute kleptomania, referencing the viral video of the diamond bracelet as Exhibit A. It requested an immediate ex parte order, freezing my bank accounts, revoking my driver's license, and transferring total medical, physical, and financial guardianship to Soren Whitfield pending a formal psychiatric evaluation. Attached to the summons was a court order from the probate division. Mandatory psychiatric and cognitive capacity evaluation ordered for Friday, June 14 th, at 9 a.m., with Ellen Pritchard, M.D. They believed they had executed a checkmate. They believed an official court summons and an unannounced psychiatric evaluation would break my spirit and force my surrender. I pulled my cell phone from my pocket and dialed Trudy Henderson's direct extension. "Trudy," I said, looking out the study window at the high branches of the oak tree swaying in the afternoon wind. "The probate summons just arrived. They've scheduled me for an evaluation with Dr. Ellen Pritchard tomorrow morning." Trudy's voice came back over the line, crisp, steady, and utterly lethal. "Let them bring their court order, Lawrence. We have filed our emergency motion to dismiss, attach the certified mortgage fraud dossier, and submitted the emergency revocation notice under Clause 6. Dr. Pritchard is one of the most respected forensic evaluators in the state of Georgia. Tomorrow morning, Soren and Tatiana's manufactured lie walks straight into the buzzsaw of the truth. I closed the court summons, laid it squarely beside the forged mortgage file, and took a long, deep breath. The storm was directly overhead, but my foundation was anchored deep in bedrock. The concrete basement beneath the Roswell estate was cool, smelling faintly of cured mortar, cedar, and undisturbed dust. At 10 a.m. on Thursday, Gerald Voss stepped through the utility access door carrying a heavy aluminum diagnostic case. Gerald was 62 years old, a retired field communications specialist who had engineered, wired, and maintained high-security surveillance grids across North Georgia for over 2 decades. He had installed the integrated 8-camera circuit on this property 8 years prior, hand-pulling heavy-gauge coaxial cables through the floor joists to ensure every angle of the perimeter. Common corridors and access points remained uncompromised. Gerald walked straight to the steel junction cabinet mounted beside the primary breaker panel. He unlatched the housing, unspooled a multimeter lead, and ran his fingers along the primary power input terminal. "Your son told me this entire multiplex processor suffered a catastrophic motherboard burnout 6 months ago," Gerald remarked, his voice low and raspy against the quiet masonry walls. "Said he had a licensed technician coming to replace the entire digital rack. I told him that was impossible because I built these boards with heavy-duty surge suppressors." "What actually happened, Gerald?" I asked, standing beside the rack. Gerald reached behind the main transformer block and pulled a thick, 3-prong industrial cable into the light. The heavy black rubber cord had been cleanly unplugged from the dedicated wall receptacle and wedged behind the drywall to make the disconnect completely invisible from the outside. "No burnout," Gerald said, looking at me with grim, knowing eyes. "Someone reached in here on March 18th, pulled the master supply plug and coiled the lead out of view. A deliberate manual sabotage. It took 5 seconds and 0 tools. Can the local storage drives be salvaged? The high-capacity digital video recorder has an independent, battery-buffered system clock," Gerald explained, snapping the master cable firmly back into the wall socket. "The firmware never lost its timestamps. The moment I seat this power connection, all 8 high-resolution feeds will cycle back online. and the continuous rolling buffer will initiate recording immediately. With a sharp click and the low, rising hum of an internal cooling fan, the rack blinked to life. 8 miniature monochrome diagnostic screens flickered across the master console, displaying sharp, real-time visual feeds. The main gate, the front brick colonnade, the rear flagstone patio overlooking the oak tree, the side garage apron, the ground floor hallway, the formal kitchen, the grand foyer, and the second-story residential landing. I handed Gerald $300 in cash. "Keep this service call strictly between us, Gerald." Gerald closed his toolbox with a solid thud. "I was never here, Lawrence. Give 'em hell." By 1:30 p.m., the restored surveillance grid had already captured its first vital piece of forensic evidence. Sitting in my study with a secure, encrypted link routed directly to my laptop through Trudy Henderson's firm, I watched the camera feed covering the second-floor corridor. Tatiana was pacing outside her bedroom suite, phone pressed tightly against her ear, gesturing with manic intensity as her voice fed clearly through the high-gain directional microphone. "What is the fastest statutory mechanism to secure temporary conservatorship over an incapacitated elder in Fulton County?" she demanded of an unknown voice on the line. "We have the police incident report for the stolen jewelry, 30 witness statements from the weekend barbecue, and a pending quitclaim deed. If he refuses to sign voluntarily before Friday, we need an emergency judicial order granting us plenary control over his physical custody and all banking facilities before probate opens next week." She made 2 more calls over the next 40 minutes, consulting different family law attorneys in Alpharetta and Sandy Springs, probing for any expedited legal loophole that would allow them to bypass a full evidentiary hearing. Every word, every timestamp, and every calculated phrase was encoded directly into the secure digital archive. At 3:15 p.m., my phone chimed with a cryptic brief text message from an unregistered prepaid number. "Uncle Lawrence, park bench by the duck pond, Roswell Area Park, 4 p.m. sharp. Come alone through the South Trail." I recognized the cadence of the message immediately. It was my 24-year-old nephew, Callum. I parked my truck 2 blocks away on a quiet residential side street and walked through the wooded pine trail to the edge of the pond. Callum sat on the far corner of a weathered wooden bench, wearing a faded gray hoodie, his hands buried deep inside his pockets, his shoulders hunched tight like a man carrying an unbearable weight. When I approached and sat on the opposite end of the bench, he didn't offer a standard greeting. He pulled a black smartphone from his pocket, plugged in a pair of wired earphones, and handed one earbud to me. "Uncle Lawrence," Callum whispered, his voice trembling as his eyes scanned the surrounding walking path. "I couldn't sleep after what happened at the barbecue. I stayed overnight in the guest room like a coward, listening to them through the floorboards. On Sunday morning at 6:45 a.m., while you were still upstairs, I stood in the pantry alcove beside the kitchen and recorded this. You need to hear what they are planning to do to you." He pressed the digital playback button. The audio track opened with the faint sound of coffee pouring into porcelain, followed by Tatiana's voice, sharp, crystalline, and laced with chilling amusement. "He didn't even fight back when I pulled the bracelet out, Soren. The old man just stood there like a stone. This is going to be 10 times easier than we thought. Once the probate court signs off on the temporary guardianship next week, we list the lower 3 acres on the commercial exchange and gut the interior." Then came my son Soren's voice, low, cold, and utterly devoid of human remorse. "Just ensure Marcus Brennan serves the probate summons before Friday. The medical evaluation with Dr. Pritchard is scheduled for tomorrow morning at 9. If he shows up lucid, he might convince her he's still functional." What followed on the recording caused the blood in my veins to turn completely to ice. Tatiana let out a dry, venomous chuckle. "He won't be lucid, Soren." I took 2 10-milligram tablets of liquid temazepam from my mother's insomnia prescription and dissolved them into the concentrated cold brew pitcher in the refrigerator. He drinks 2 full mugs every morning at 7 sharp without fail. By the time he walks into Dr. Pritchard's office at 9, his speech will be slurred, his motor reflexes will be shot, and his short-term recall will be completely scrambled. He'll look like an advanced dementia patient who can barely remember his own birthday. The doctor will sign the emergency commitment recommendation within 20 minutes. Soren replied without a second of hesitation, "Good. Make sure you wipe the glass pitcher before the movers arrive next week." The recording clicked off. A suffocating, absolute silence fell over the park bench. The wind rustled through the Georgia pines overhead, but inside my chest, the world had dropped into a terrifying, lethal stillness. They were not merely attempting to steal my home, forge mortgages, and ruin my reputation. They were actively drugging my morning coffee with prescription narcotics to chemically induce cognitive failure and orchestrate my permanent imprisonment in a psychiatric facility. Callum looked at me, tears streaming down his pale cheeks. "Uncle Lawrence, they're trying to destroy your mind." I sent the raw audio file to Ms. Henderson's encrypted server 15 minutes ago. I'm so sorry I didn't tackle Tatiana right there on the patio when she reached into your jacket. I placed a firm, steady hand on the young man's shoulder. You gave me the truth when it mattered most, Callum. That took real courage. You saved my life today. As Callum stood up and disappeared down the wooded path, my phone began to vibrate violently. The caller ID displayed an incoming long-distance call from Jacksonville, Florida. I answered the line. Hello, Renee. A broken, ragged sob burst through the speaker. My 58-year-old sister was weeping so hard she could barely articulate her words. Lawrence, oh God, Lawrence, please forgive me, Renee cried, her voice cracking with profound shame. Soren called me 2 weeks before the barbecue. He told me you were wandering the property at night, hallucinating, hiding family heirlooms, and getting aggressive. He begged me to fly up from Florida to help him get you into a safe assisted living facility. When Tatiana pulled that bracelet from your pocket, I was so shocked, so confused by the crowd, that I froze like a terrified child. I should have stood between you and that witch. I should have defended my own brother. Take a breath, Renee, I said, my voice calm, level, and unwavering. I haven't slept a single hour, Lawrence, she continued, wiping her tears over the line. I called Harold Kemp, our cousins Marcus and David, and Aunt Clara this morning. We all know what Soren is doing now. 4 of us have already signed sworn, notarized affidavits under penalty of perjury, testifying that Soren solicited us to act as false witnesses to a manufactured theft. Trudy Henderson already has our signed statements in her master brief. Thank you, Renee, I said softly. Your statement is going to help close the door on this nightmare once and for all. I hung up the phone, stood up from the park bench, and walked back to my truck. The pieces were fully assembled. The 8 security cameras were rolling, capturing every calculated movement inside the mansion. The audio recording of their drugging conspiracy was locked in Trudy Henderson's digital vault. 4 family eyewitnesses had broken their silence and signed sworn testimony exposing the barbecue ambush as a premeditated fraud. Soren and Tatiana believed they were sending a chemically compromised, helpless old man into Dr. Ellen Pritchard's psychiatric evaluation tomorrow morning at 9. They had no idea that I was walking into that clinic completely sober, armed with ironclad criminal evidence, ready to drop the legal guillotine on both their lives. The morning sun cast long clinical shadows across the limestone facade of the Fulton County Court Clinic in downtown Atlanta as I arrived at precisely 8:45 a.m. on Friday. I wore my clean, ironed white Oxford shirt, a dark navy jacket, and polished leather boots. I had bypassed the kitchen entirely that morning, refusing even a drop of tap water from the house, leaving the poisoned pitcher of temazepam-laced cold brew sitting undisturbed in the refrigerator for forensic evidence. At 9:00 a.m. sharp, the inner door of examination suite 3 opened. Dr. Ellen Pritchard stepped out, holding a thick clinical folder and a tablet. Dr. Pritchard was 60 years old, with sharp, silver-streaked hair, rimless spectacles, and an expression of unyielding clinical neutrality. For 18 years, she had served as the senior court-appointed forensic psychiatric evaluator for Georgia's probate, civil, and criminal court systems. She was a woman whose professional signature carried the power to strip a citizen of their fundamental civil liberties or expose a predatory conservatorship petition within minutes. She had seen every shade of familial greed, manufactured madness, and elder exploitation that the state of Georgia had to offer. Mr. Lawrence Whitfield, she asked, her voice calm, measured, and businesslike. Yes, Dr. Pritchard. Please follow me. The examination room was minimalist and quiet, 2 high-backed ergonomic chairs separated by a wide wooden consultation table, framed by a single window overlooking the state capitol dome. There was no desk to hide behind, no ambient distractions, and no room for rehearsed performances. Dr. Pritchard unclasped the 30-page emergency petition filed by Tatiana and Soren Whitfield, resting her palms flat against the manila folder. Mr. Whitfield, she began, looking at me over the rims of her glasses. The petition before me alleges severe, accelerating cognitive decline, severe short-term memory deficit, paranoid delusions regarding family real estate assets, and impulsive kleptomania. Under the statutory mandate of the Fulton County Probate Court, I am required to administer a comprehensive 90-minute neuropsychological and cognitive capacity assessment. This will evaluate orientation, executive logic, rapid mathematical sequencing, spatial reasoning, and immediate and delayed working recall. Are you prepared to proceed? I have spent 40 years as a structural builder and licensed general contractor, Dr. Pritchard, I replied, my voice steady, deep, and immovable. I am accustomed to having my work inspected down to the millimeter. Begin whenever you are ready. For the next 90 minutes, Dr. Pritchard executed the most rigorous, exhausting battery of cognitive stress tests known to medical science. She started with standard orientation, the exact date, the day of the week, the current presiding judge of the Fulton County Superior Court, and the historical timeline of the state legislature. I answered each without a fraction of a second's hesitation. Then came the complex diagnostic matrices, serial subtraction of prime numbers backward from 200, reverse span digit memorization up to 9 sequences, and multi-tier logical syllogisms. When she presented complex three-dimensional spatial rotation diagrams and abstract geometrical isometric projections designed to trip up early-stage vascular dementia patients, my 4 decades of drafting commercial structural blueprints took over. I analyzed the stress vectors, identified the rotational anomalies, and calculated the spatial coordinates with absolute effortless precision. She gave me 5 unrelated abstract words to memorize: obsidian, compass, stent, timber, bedrock. 40 minutes later, after running through 20 pages of abstract reasoning scenarios, situational ethics problems, and legal comprehension paragraphs, she abruptly paused her stopwatch and looked up. "The 5 words, Mr. Whitfield? Obsidian, compass, stent, timber, bedrock," I stated instantly, holding her gaze with unwavering clarity. Dr. Pritchard lowered her fountain pen onto the desk. A subtle, rare shift occurred in her clinical demeanor, a profound, quiet respect taking the place of formal neutrality. "Mr. Whitfield," she said, closing her examination folio with a definitive tap, "your cognitive processing speed, abstract reasoning faculties, and working memory recall are in the 98th percentile for any adult, regardless of age. There is not a single shred, marker, or indication of dementia, cognitive impairment, or psychological instability in your neurological profile. The assertions in this petition are not merely unfounded. They are an absolute, egregious fabrication." "Thank you, doctor," I replied. "However," she continued, opening a secondary medical requisition form, "standard probate protocol in contested conservatorship cases requires a mandatory toxicology screening to establish a clean pharmacological baseline. Our laboratory technician will draw 3 vials of blood down the hall before you depart." I stood up and followed her to the adjacent phlebotomy suite. The lab technician drew the blood, sealed the vials in tamper-evident clinical biohazard sleeves, and loaded them into the automated rapid centrifuge analyzer for statutory broad-spectrum metabolic and narcotic screening. Dr. Pritchard instructed me to wait in the private consultation office while the digital chromatography panels processed. 25 minutes passed. Suddenly, the heavy door swung open. Dr. Pritchard walked back into the room, but her calm professional composure was entirely gone. Her face was pale with profound fury, and behind her walked Detective Sergeant Frank Miller of the Fulton County Sheriff's Department, accompanied by the clinic's chief medical toxicologist. Dr. Pritchard held a high-priority red-stamped laboratory diagnostic sheet. "Mr. Whitfield," Dr. Pritchard's voice shook with suppressed, razor-sharp rage, "your rapid blood panel returned a confirmed trace metabolite of temazepam, a high-potency, Schedule IV benzodiazepine sedative typically prescribed for severe clinical insomnia." I leaned forward, my jaw clenching tight. "I have never in my life been prescribed a sedative. Dr. Pritchard, I do not take sleeping pills. The serum concentration is at a sub-therapeutic early metabolized level," the toxicologist explained, holding up the telemetry printout. "It indicates you were exposed to a microdose of the dissolved liquid formulation within the last 24 to 48 hours. Consistent with secondary absorption from a contaminated food or beverage source. Had you consumed a full diagnostic dosage this morning, you would have arrived at this clinic with severe motor ataxia, slurred articulation, and catastrophic memory disruption." Detective Miller stepped forward, pulling a heavy tactical evidence folio from under his arm. "Mr. Whitfield," Detective Miller stated, his voice grim and authoritative, "Mrs. Trudy Henderson forwarded a certified encrypted audio file to our Major Crimes Division 2 hours ago. In that recording, your daughter-in-law, Tatiana Whitfield, explicitly details dissolving 20 milligrams of prescription temazepam into your refrigerated cold brew coffee pitcher with the deliberate intent of chemically incapacitating you for this exact court evaluation." Dr. Pritchard took her legal seal, stamped the psychiatric evaluation report with an authoritative heavy blow, and signed her name in bold black ink across the bottom of the dismissal order. "I am certifying to the Fulton County Probate Court that Lawrence Whitfield is fully competent, highly lucid, and entirely capable of managing all personal, financial, and real estate affairs," Dr. Pritchard declared, her eyes blazing with righteousness. "Furthermore, I am executing an immediate emergency medical crime notification under Georgia Statute 35-8. We are sealing these blood vials as primary physical evidence of attempted aggravated battery and intentional chemical assault on a protected senior citizen." Detective Miller took the sealed medical envelope from Dr. Pritchard. "The Fulton County District Attorney's Office has already combined this toxicological evidence with the forged $180,000 mortgage dossier and the 6-camera digital video surveillance archive provided by your attorney," Detective Miller explained, looking at me with total, unyielding gravity. We have opened an active, multi-felony indictment against Soren and Tatiana Whitfield. The charges include first-degree forgery, grand mortgage fraud, intentional poisoning, and systematic elder financial exploitation. Combined sentencing guidelines put them at a mandatory minimum of 20 years in state prison. The warrant is being prepared for judicial signature. "When do you execute the warrants, detective?" I asked quietly. "The district attorney wants the indictment sealed until their 30-day civil eviction timeline expires on the property," Detective Miller replied. "We are letting them dig their hole all the way to the bottom. When we strike, it will be total and absolute." I thanked Dr. Pritchard and Detective Miller, shook their hands, and walked out into the bright Georgia midday sun. By 6 p.m. I arrived back at the estate in Roswell. The house was completely silent. Soren and Tatiana were out in Buckhead, likely meeting with their secondary real estate brokers to discuss listing the land, wholly convinced that my psychiatric evaluation that morning had secured their legal victory. I changed into my worn denim work jeans, pulled on my leather gloves, and walked out to the secluded garden corner at the south perimeter of the 6-acre property. Against the hand-built cedar fence, bathed in the rich amber glow of the setting sun, Yvonne's yellow rose bushes were in full, magnificent bloom. We had planted those very bushes 38 years ago during our first spring on this land. For 6 long weeks of grief and betrayal, I had watered their deep roots at dawn, letting the soil drink slowly, remembering how Yvonne had stood beside these flowers and smiled. I turned on the brass spigot, uncoiled the heavy green hose, and stood in the falling twilight, watching the water soak deep into the red Georgia clay. The cicadas began their evening chorus in the towering branches of the oak tree Yvonne had planted the year Soren was born. The old tree stood patient, immovable, and massive against the purple horizon, its roots anchored deep into the living earth, outlasting the noise, the greed, and the fleeting deceit of those who thought they could cut it down. I remembered what Yvonne had whispered to me in this very garden on our 30th anniversary, pressing a yellow petal into my palm. "Yellow roses mean you made it through, Lawrence. Whatever storm comes against this house, you will make it through." The guardianship petition was dead. The criminal indictment was locked in the state vault. The 20-year prison trap was set one more Saturday. They had invited the entire extended family back for one final victory barbecue to celebrate what they believed was my surrender. I turned off the spigot, coiled the hose, and looked up at the quiet mansion. The trap was ready, the foundation was cured, and under the amber string lights tomorrow night, the master builder was going to bring the entire house of lies crashing down upon their heads. They hung the amber string lights between the brick pillars and the old oak tree in the exact same pattern as they had 4 weeks ago. Walking down the stone path toward the rear patio at 7 on that Saturday evening, I saw the folding chairs arranged in the identical semicircle, the linen tablecloths laid out, and the grill smoking under the warm Georgia twilight. Soren and Tatiana had invited the entire extended circle back to the Roswell estate for what they believed was the victory celebration of their lives. They were convinced the probate court had quietly processed their emergency conservatorship petition after Friday's psychiatric evaluation. They believed I was cornered, isolated, and ready to sign the quitclaim deed in front of 30 witnesses to avoid being dragged into public court. My sister Renee was already there, standing near the fence beside her son Callum, her face pale but determined. Our cousins Marcus and David sat at the periphery, while neighbors who had watched the first accusation lingered near the drinks table with visible unease. When Soren saw me approach carrying a sleek black laptop under my arm, his face broke into an arrogant, practiced grin. He wore a crisp linen shirt and stepped forward with his arms wide, projecting the effortless warmth of a dutiful son. "Dad, I'm glad you decided to come down," Soren announced loudly, drawing the entire patio's attention. "I think we all need to clear the air once and for all about the unfortunate misunderstanding last month. We're ready to put this behind us and move forward as a family." Tatiana glided up beside him in a designer ivory sundress, holding a glass of white wine. Sparkling boldly on her right wrist was the exact $4,000 sapphire and diamond bracelet she had pulled from my pocket 4 weeks prior. "We are so glad you joined us, Lawrence," Tatiana said, layering her voice with sweet, condescending pity. "Family forgives, don't they? Maybe you'd like to explain to everyone why you've been so confused and making those wild accusations about mortgages and cameras." I stopped at the head of the heavy cedar table I had hand-built 30 years ago. I set the laptop down, flipped open the screen, and plugged in a pair of high-output Bluetooth speakers. "I don't need to explain anything, Tatiana," I said, my voice cutting through the evening air like a cold blade. I brought the house's memory to speak for itself. I pressed the spacebar, the 16-inch display illuminated, and the speakers boomed with high-fidelity clarity across the silent backyard. The screen split into a 4-quadrant security feed from 4 weeks ago, bearing official Fulton County Sheriff timestamps. The first video showed Tatiana standing in the second-floor hallway, pulling the sapphire bracelet from her jewelry box, checking over her shoulder, and whispering directly on the high-gain audio feed. I'll slide it into his chore coat pocket while everyone's distracted by the grill. Once everyone thinks the old man is stealing, the guardianship petition goes through without a fight. The backyard dropped into a suffocating absolute silence. The hiss of the grill burner sounded like a dying breath. Renee pressed a trembling hand over her mouth. Cousin Marcus froze mid-sip, his eyes bulging as he stared at the glowing monitor. Tatiana's face drained of every ounce of color, turning a ghastly, chalky white. She lunged toward the table to slam the laptop shut. That's illegal. You can't show that. Sit down, Tatiana, I commanded, not raising my voice, but injecting 40 years of unyielding authority into every syllable. Her knees buckled, and she fell backward into a folding chair. The video cut to the kitchen audio from 3 days prior, Callum's clean recording playing in sync with the basement surveillance feed. Tatiana's voice rang across the patio, cold and venomous. I dissolved 20 milligrams of temazepam into his cold brew. He'll look like an advanced dementia patient who can barely remember his own birthday. Dr. Pritchard will sign the emergency commitment within 20 minutes. Then Soren's response echoed through the speakers. Good. Make sure you wipe the glass pitcher before the movers arrive. Soren stood frozen in the center of the patio, his jaw slack, his face turning an ashen, leaden gray under the amber lights. His eyes darted frantically across the yard, searching for a single sympathetic face among the relatives. Every guest was staring at him in unmitigated horror and disgust. Before Soren could utter a single word of denial, the heavy iron side gate swung open with a sharp metallic clatter. Walking onto the brick patio with crisp, authoritative footsteps was attorney Trudy Henderson, flanked by Marcus Brennan, holding a stack of red-waxed legal folios, and Raymond Pike, a licensed master locksmith carrying a heavy steel toolbox. Trudy stopped directly in front of my son. She didn't shout. She didn't display anger. She operated with the lethal precision of a surgeon. Soren Whitfield, Trudy said, her voice ringing across the silent yard. Pursuant to Clause 6 of the Revocable Occupancy License Agreement executed with this estate, your license to occupy 1420 Ridgeview Manor is hereby revoked immediately due to verified elder financial exploitation, criminal harassment, and attempted chemical battery. Marcus Brennan is serving you with a mandatory 30-day notice to vacate the premises under Georgia property law. Tatiana scrambled to her feet, her hands shaking violently as she pulled out her phone, dialing frantically. This is our home. I'm calling our litigation counsel right now. Save your battery, Mrs. Whitfield. Trudy interjected calmly, looking Tatiana dead in the eye. Your 3 previous attorneys were notified this afternoon of the Fulton County District Attorney's active criminal indictment. When they reviewed the toxicological blood results confirming temazepam poisoning, the forged $180,000 mortgage deed, and the security archives, all 3 firms formally declined representation. You are facing 20 years in state prison. No civil lawyer in Georgia will touch this case. Tatiana's phone slipped from her fingers, clattering onto the flagstones and shattering its screen. From the rear porch, Raymond Pike began unbolting the deadbolt cylinders with a series of heavy, echoing metallic clicks. Master locks are being keyed exclusively to Mr. Lawrence Whitfield as of right now, Raymond announced. Trudy turned back to Soren and pulled a final cream-colored envelope from her leather portfolio. The envelope was sealed with dark blue wax, bearing Yvonne's unmistakable, delicate cursive across the front, for Soren, to be opened only if Clause 6 is enforced. Soren took the envelope with trembling, lifeless hands. He broke the wax seal and unfolded the paper. As he read his mother's final words written from her hospice bed 3 years ago, his shoulders buckled. Soren, I know you. I watched you become someone I didn't recognize, and I couldn't stop it. If you are reading this letter, you chose to prove my worst fears right. I forgive you because a mother always forgives, but I could not leave your father defenseless against your greed. What happens tonight is not his doing. It is the harvest of the seeds you planted long ago. I love you still, but your father's foundation will stand long after your lies have turned to dust. Mom, a ragged, shattered wail tore out of Soren's throat. He crumpled the paper against his chest and sank to his knees on the cold brick patio, sobbing uncontrollably into the dirt as 30 family members turned their backs and began walking out the front gate in total silence. By Wednesday morning, the final chapter of their eviction concluded. A large commercial moving truck sat in the driveway as professional movers quietly packed Soren and Tatiana's personal belongings into cardboard boxes. Under Trudy Henderson's strict supervision, every piece of furniture, heirloom, and appliance purchased with my funds remained inside the mansion. The luxury European SUV parked in the garage was formally repossessed by the leasing agency after my insurance cancellation took full effect. As the moving van rolled down the long gravel driveway toward the main road, Soren broke away from the cab, Disheveled, weeping, and stripped of every illusion of wealth, he sprinted across the front lawn, collapsing on his knees at the base of the 35-year-old oak tree his mother had planted the year he was born. "Dad, please!" Soren screamed through the heavy wrought iron gate, gripping the black bars with bleeding knuckles. "Please don't do this. Give me one more chance. I have nowhere to go." I stood 10 feet inside the property line, dressed in my canvas work chore coat and heavy leather boots. I looked at the son I had raised. Seeing clearly the wreckage of his own choices, I didn't yell. I didn't open the gate. I took the heavy brass padlock, snapped it shut across the master chain with a definitive ringing click, and turned my back on the gate. I picked up the green garden hose, turned the brass spigot, and walked over to the southern fence where Yvonne's yellow rose bushes bloomed in glorious, golden defiance against the morning sun. I stood in the quiet warmth of the day, letting the water soak deep into the red clay roots, hearing Yvonne's voice whispering through the leaves. "Yellow roses mean you made it through, Lawrence. Whatever storm comes against this house, you will make it through." I had made it through. 6 weeks later, the Roswell estates smelled of roasting garlic, cedar smoke, and genuine laughter. In the warm, brightly lit kitchen, Renee was pouring fresh iced tea while Callum stood beside me at the stove, checking the prime ribs sizzling in the cast iron skillets. Down the hall, Trudy Henderson and our cousin Marcus were laughing over appetizers in the dining room. There was no tension, no planted jewelry, no whispered conspiracies in the dark, only the sacred peace of an honest home restored to those who valued the truth. I had spent 40 years building physical structures to withstand earthquakes and storms, but the greatest structure I ever built was the unyielding boundary I erected on this property 6 weeks ago. True family justice does not burn the house down in blind fury, nor does it destroy for the sake of vengeance. It is the profound, immovable courage to stop enabling the people who seek to ruin you. Love without boundaries is nothing more than a slow poison that destroys both the giver and the taker. But love grounded in absolute truth and self-respect will weather any storm on earth. Never confuse a father's patience for weakness. And remember, when a foundation is poured in truth, no lie will ever tear it down. Thank you for standing with us until the very end on Dad's Ultimate Payback. If Lawrence's story and the justice of the builder's hands resonated with you tonight, please take a moment right now to hit that subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and share this story with someone who needs the strength to set an unbreakable boundary in their own life. Drop a comment below and share your thoughts. Every single voice strengthens the Dad's Ultimate Payback community across the world. Until next time, guard your peace, protect your foundation, and never let anyone steal your dignity.